This episode of Transmissions contains references to suicide.
Nothing would have stopped us. Nothing did stop us, did it?
They just kept moving forward.
Ian's death didn't stop us, Martin's death didn't stop us, getting all the equipment stolen didn't stop us.
Through tragedy after tragedy and a complete reinvention.
There was nothing to go back to, there was no plan B.
To emerge with music adored the world over to this day.
You're uncompromising, rebellious, perverse.
I had that moment of clarity, like, wow, this sounds like nobody else in the world.
It's muscle music, it's flesh music.
Some members of both bands felt there was a competition. I never really did. I was always a New Order fan.
They've never really stopped to take a breath.
We'd never planned a year in advance because you just lived in the moment.
That was the point where I had a word with Rob about feeling like I was burnt out. He ignored me.
I mean, I don't know whether we need a therapist or an exorcist.
I'm Elizabeth Olker. Welcome back to Transmissions, the definitive story of Joy Division and New Order.
You define New Order by the things that they don't do rather than the things that they actually do. And it's kind of like, well, we don't want our picture on the sleeve, we don't want the single on the records, and we just want to do whatever it is that we want to do.
Based on more new conversations with Bernard Sumner, Stephen Morris, Gillian Gilbert and Peter Hook. This podcast tells their story as they experienced it.
In my life, I've been really lucky. I've been really lucky to be at the Sex Pistols' first gig in Manchester. I've been really lucky to watch post-punk give us another career. I've been really lucky to witness Acid House. I'm still here to tell the tale.
It's a story that started with a poster pinned to a notice board of a Manchester record shop.
And then the phone call rang and I went in the bedroom. He said, I've seen you at gigs. And I said, oh, what's your name? And he went, Ian.
I've been waiting for a guy to come and take me by the hand.
Quickly, they became something much bigger than the sum of their parts.
It was like someone else made Unknown Pleasures and we just stuck our names on it. Because it was written from the subconscious and we didn't know how we were doing it. We just did it and then finished it and then there was this thing.
Unknown territory. That's what it felt like to me. I felt like I was just getting lost in a place that I didn't know where I was, and I was so happy to be lost.
Early triumphs paved the way for what looked like an unstoppable ascent.
It was a bit like being a surfer who's just caught a wave, you know, and you just got up on the wave and you're like, whoa, oh, this is fun.
Except sometimes the unexpected, the unimaginable happens.
I was actually having Sunday dinner with my partner and the phone rang. So I was like, shit, you know, what's the news? And the news was that, you know, Ian Curtis had taken his own life.
How did we feel in the aftermath of the disaster that was Ian's departure? I want to say shock.
That might very well have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Out of the ashes, something new.
We all knew our roles in life, and we're happy with those roles. The one job that nobody really wanted suddenly became vacant.
So we wrote a few songs and then we took them out to the eastern seaboard of America, and I think we did the tour Joy Division was supposed to have done. Initially it was just me, Steve and Peter up, and we each tried singing.
When I joined, it was a bit out of the blue, really, because obviously Ian had just died, and then I got asked to be in the band.
The first fumbles towards a different identity, a different way of operating, soon became more confident.
I think there's a wonderful moment when New Order are singing Temptation, and it's as if they've just hardly written it yet, and Bernard's stumbling his way through and going, oh, you've got green eyes, oh, you've got grey and blue. Somewhere, as you're watching that, you see Bernard finding his own voice.
So you've got green eyes, so you've got blue eyes, so you've got grey eyes. Oh, you've got green eyes, so you've got blue eyes, you've got grey eyes.
And before they knew it, New Order were fully realised and growing again. Bigger now than Joy Division.
It felt like we'd become New Order. It was like going from black and white to colour.
So where did we leave off exactly? With a masterpiece of an album.
I have to say, out of all the records that I listen to now, in my opinion, Power Corruption Lies has the best production.
With an accidental smash hit.
I was at a club, so I'm standing there and it's a normal night, and for the first time, here comes the kick drum for Blue Monday. As the kick drum hit, everybody in the club started running to the dance floor. Running. So it instantly went from like 30 people to 300 in seconds. I'm like, what is happening? I'm getting chills even just thinking about the moment. And it was like, oh my God, I'm hearing a song I will hear for the rest of my life. I saw my generation go, this is the song.
It just still sounds futuristic. It feels like something that an artist could release today and it would blow people's minds.
I was thinking, how can anybody dance to this? Which was like an anti-dance record, really.
With a band riding the wave, harnessing that momentum, absolutely no clue how far or where it might take them.
I remember walking through Manchester with Tony Wilson. You know, he said, in a year's time, you'll be laid by a swimming pool in LA. And I was like, I just laughed at him, you know.
The idea of a potential collaboration between Quincy and ourselves came up. And I was kind of like, fucking hell, we can't do that. If we go in the studio with Quincy and he finds out we're complete idiots, we'd be rumbles.
Every time we went back to America, the audience would double and then triple and then quadruple. And, you know, it just got bigger and bigger.
I don't know what they thought of us. But we used to have to do meet and greets, and I was like, why? Why do you want to meet us, you know?
After surviving the trauma of so much loss, New Order were ready to seize life with both hands.
I was reading an article about a recording studio in the hills in Ibiza.
Then we discovered the clubs.
And the barman couldn't speak English, but he knew ecstasis, you know, and he had a bag of pills.
Ready to pounce on whatever batshit opportunities might be heading in their direction.
Well, some of the crowd are on the pitch.
And I said, I'm David Bloomfield from the Football Association. Would New Order like to record the 1990 World Cup song? And to Tony's everlasting credit, in an instant, he said yes.
In a pub in Manchester, someone come up and say, you write a song for the FA. I'd have gone, are you serious? No fucking way.
They said, oh, you all right? I said, yeah. What have you got? And I went, oh, here we go. Look, here it is. E is for England. England starts with E. We'll all be smiling when we're in Italy.
A band happily oblivious to any suggestion that the wave they were riding might one day reach the shore.
I remember saying to Tony in '89 there's a recession coming, and somehow he thought that Manchester might be immune from it.
When I started out as a musician, I just wanted to be a guitarist in a cult band, Joy Division.
It was only by the time we got to Brotherhood, really, I think I can say without fear of contradiction from the others, that we were heartily fed up with each other.
But there comes a point where you don't want to destroy yourself because of the band. And you'd hope to think that somebody would help you, but we didn't really talk about things like that.
And then kabang! Machine guns, cocaine, criminals, people started dying.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves. All of that is still to come. This journey will not be without its turbulence. But New Order were always a band of their times. And the mid-1980s, where we last left this lot, were turbulent times indeed.
New Order sort of reflected, I think, a living consciousness that existed at that time. The Falklands War had just finished. The miners' strike was just about to kick off. You know, Thatcher's sort of devastating influence on civil life in this country was at its height. And that needed a soundtrack.
For the novelist Andrew O'Hagan, that soundtrack was New Order.
I mean, I remember Power, Corruption and Lies just sounding like a sound that was utterly essential then. It felt new in a way that very few things do feel new, because it was tied to a kind of energy, a change, a rebelliousness, a sense of politics, a sense of the rise of the North, a sense of anti-spite and small-minded Tory values. But that was all encoded. They weren't singing about that. That was just there in the sound. And to us, it was anthemic almost immediately. Just a whole gaggle of boys that I grew up with just suddenly got out of their seats in the pub hearing that music, because it sounded like them, it sounded like the times in a way that was quite hard to define.
New Order might not have been singing about the politics of the time, but they were definitely singing to them.
I wonder if Thatcher understands. She can probably sequestrate our funds, but she can't sequestrate our minds, and she can't freeze our will to win.
The lights go down and the curtains come up on this second act of the New Order story on the 14th of May, 1984.
Well, it was in the days when Thatcher was trying to close down, well, didn't try, she did close down all the mines, amongst other things. Us being from the north, where she was trying to close down all the factories, could relate to the strife that the miners were going through. So we got asked to play a benefit for them, and we did.
The rather grand setting is the Royal Festival Hall in London. It's at odds slightly with the audience who fill it, composed entirely of striking miners, fresh from a march through the capital. And the warm-up act, a young comedian called Keith Allen.
Bizarrely, I didn't really know New Order at the time. And I'm kind of guessing here, but I think it must have been Tony Wilson.
Tony Wilson, beloved owner of New Order's record label Factory, and always full of very bright ideas.
Basically, I used to do this character called Jerry Arkwright, the Northern Industrial Gay. You know, he was a highly politicised character in a leather pair of pants, some small folded down Wellington boots, a leather biker's cap, and I would go on with a 48-inch Stilson spanner and a bottle of Johnson's baby oil. And I never wrote anything down, you know, it was all performance. Anyway, Tony, he must have said, you know, typical Tony, oh, you've got to get this guy in to introduce you on stage.
In 1984, this was an idea that made sense to all parties involved.
So, I went down there, got changed into my gear and walked on. I was just about squirting myself in Johnson's baby oil. And he spoke like that. He says, right, you southern bastards, you fucking pigs. I'm going to tell you a story. And I did this poem, and it was, you soft southern bastards, you cultural pigs. I've come with a tale from up north. I'm an industrial gay, and I like it that way. Fish fucking on the Firth of Forth. The time has come for the north to rise in a welter of leather and sweat. And I've breezed down south looking for big boys, and I haven't met a big one yet. Up north, us lads were hard and firm. We're up at crack at dawn, bricklaying, fish fucking, and a bit of our graft. No women to keep us warm. I got to about that, and about 7 security guys ran on stage and threw me off.
Terry, our roadie, threw him off stage in his jockstrap. because he thought he'd got up out of the audience. I don't know what the rest of the audience was dressed like, if that's what happens to you.
As it turns out, not everyone had got the memo on the night's opening turn.
And of course, Tony hadn't told them. He's going, no, he's with the band, And that's about all I can remember of it, to be quite honest with you.
By all accounts, it was a memorable night. And not just for the comedy. Drummer and electronics extraordinaire, Stephen Morris.
It was also notable for one of our early performances of the song that would become The Perfect Kiss. But at that time, as we didn't have any titles for it, and as we writing these songs almost spontaneously on stage, it was announced as having the title I've Got a Cock As Long As the M1 by Bernard.
This one's a new song. It's called I've Got a Cock Like the M1.
The band may have reached new heights of popularity with Blue Monday, but they were still resolutely doing things their way.
We were premiering the songs live, which was a very unusual thing to do. We were actually testing them out in front of an audience, almost subconsciously, really. See how we could make them better. Barney wouldn't have a vocal, and he'd just have a few pernos, and we'd go on and we'd just play it. And if he felt inspired, he'd sing, and if he didn't, he wouldn't.
Earlier, when I said the crowd at the benefit was entirely made up of minors, that wasn't quite true. There was at least one other punter in the audience.
Quincy Jones sent their representative over to try and sign us for his record label, Quest, a guy called Tom Atencio.
A hotshot record label exec dispatched by the godfather of modern pop music all the way from America. Meet Tom Atencio.
Everyone in America had been trying to sign New Order, some of them since Joy Division, with no success.
The band's manager, Rob Gretton, and Factory Records boss, Tony Wilson, had long been sceptical of smooth-talking men who promised you the world.
I knew that Bob Krasnow at Electro Asylum had actually offered Rob and Tony a blank check. And Tony's version of it was, well, we're not idiots. We know we have to pay it back.
And of course, New Order already had a record label, Factory Records.
They were fiercely independent. Factory was independent. It was distributed by Rough Trade in America. So it had very limited distribution outside of major cities. So the band was relatively unknown here.
Tom Atencio and Quincy Jones felt that Quest Records, a subsidiary of the enormous Warner Records, could offer New Order more than that. They could help them break America. And Tony Wilson and Rob Gretton, for their part, seemed interested in the pitch.
Honestly, with the poor transatlantic communication at the time, and Rob's Mancunian accent, and my lack of accounting for the 8-hour time difference, and that Rob had already probably been in the pub for 4 of those hours, and smoking draw for 8 of those hours, I understood about every 4th word. And they must have thought I was a complete idiot, because all I could do was say, yeah, right, that's fantastic.
So it was suggested that an in-person meeting might help with the communication barriers.
Rob said, we're doing a miners' benefit, and you should come for that. So I came over with the full expectation that I was signing the band. So I get to the benefit. Arthur Scargill is speaking, and it's fantastic.
Well, I say without fear of contradiction that if those who built our trade union could look on this scene today, they would salute our young miners as the finest.
Oh, this is amazing. You know, it's part of my cultural education that this man should just be the head of the miners' union. He'd be president in America. He was so eloquent and absolutely fascinating.
I'm picturing Tom wearing an immaculate, wide-lapelled cream suit, lurking at the back of this rowdy crowd of miners. You have to wonder what he made of New Order. In the midst of all that chaos, this very British band with a surprise smash hit single, but an evident appetite for anarchy and dick jokes.
I don't know what the hell he'd make of us. I don't know what I made of New Order at that point. We were just doing whatever we wanted, whenever came into our heads, taking everything that we could take and just getting on with it.
Whatever it was that Tom saw, he wasn't deterred. After the show, he headed backstage to seal the deal with Rob Gretton.
And I run into Michael Rosenblatt, who is the son of Geffen Records president. And I was shocked and annoyed, and I didn't know if he was invited there as a friend or if it was my competition.
Well, it looked like Rob Gretton was pulling a fast one on poor old Tom.
And I proceeded to hit the bar. And the band finished playing, and I said, Rob, we need to go back to the hotel and have a discussion. And we got into it. I mean, physically, we got into it.
A fist fight might have been the end of it, but both sides saw an opportunity in the other. For Tom Atencio, the prospect of capturing a wild, unruly band and making them stars. For New Order, a first-class ticket to the exciting new world of America. Because at the time, America was a very exciting place, one that New Order had already had a taste of.
The American thing came about quite gently. When we started to tour America, the audiences in England were very male. They were very football, hooligan aspect. They were all the same way that you'd been fighting for your life with the punk gigs. There was always an aspect of this in English gigs. So when we actually got to America and the audiences were 50-50 male-female, it had a whole different vibe. And we liked it. We loved the American attitude to music, to groups, to touring groups. I'd have to say we fell for it hook, line and sinker.
By the mid-1980s, New Order had spent plenty of time stateside. And accordingly, they'd been exposed to different ways of doing things. Scenes beyond post-punk. The influence of the music they were hearing over there was already filtering into their sound. Andrew O'Hagan.
The New Order folk had got involved in New York around about 1981, and suddenly Giorgio Moroder, the kind of nightclub scene in New York, Palladium, that sound, the DJs that were starting to emerge, was making inroads into their minds, I think. And at the same time, Kraftwerk and these influences, which would have been thought slightly questionable by old-fashioned punks, certainly, and even by some post-punks, they would have thought that to be slightly posy and a bit kind of mannered. But it was quite noticeable that New Order didn't seem to mind the mannered or the sort of staged aspects of that culture. And they picked it up from the clubs and brought it straight in.
Bernard Sumner.
There was a scene in New York that was happening with I don't know what you call it, early electro. A friend in New York, a DJ called Frank Calari, and he used to send me cassette tapes. These are the good old days, you know. He used to post me cassette tapes of New York radio stations over. And one of the guys' names that came up was Arthur Baker.
The year before the Miners' benefit concert, New Order had travelled to New York City for a bit of research and development with a dynamite producer called Arthur Baker, the man responsible for Africa Bambaata's big hit, Planet Rock.
I was introduced to the band by Michael Schamberg, who was a friend of mine, and he ran Factory New York for whatever it actually was. They didn't really have an office or anything. And he had said, oh, you know, this cool band wants to meet up with you. And I had heard of Joy Division. So I did my research, and the only thing I heard from everyone was, oh, they're so moody. They don't smile. They don't talk to people.
But Arthur wasn't worried about their personalities. He heard something in the songs that he wanted to explore. So a session was arranged.
We went over there to sole purpose of recording with him and try to, you know, get an insight into this kind of music that was being produced over there in New York. And there were the various clubs playing it. The prime one was the Fun House. So we went down there to check it out, and it was a pretty wild place. It was a Hispanic club, basically. I remember the bouncer on the door looking like, he was huge. It was like a car stood on end, an American car stood on end. And it was a pretty sort of macho Hispanic environment. Maybe they had punch balls in there, and guys hit the punch balls and practicing knockouts.
This trip to New York City would activate something in New Order. For all their travels, it was a world they'd never seen before. Photographer Kevin Cummins was there with the band at the time.
It was astonishing, actually. It was very different to what we were used to. You know, people weren't going out on the dance floor in grey overcoats. I mean, the day we got to New York, Ruth Polsky, who was Factory's person on the ground in New York, and Ruth also ran Danceteria. Ruth had said to us, "We've got a PA on the roof tonight, why don't you come and we'll have a party?" And we went, and it was Madonna. And Madonna did this PA on the roof to about 15 of us. And then we had a party in the offices at Danceteria, where Johnny Dynell was their house DJ, and he had this kind of sequined all-in-one jumpsuit in white. And by the end of the evening, I was photographing Rob Gretton dancing around in Johnny Dynell's white sequin jumpsuit like he was part of Funkadelic or something.
In other words, it was about as far away from the working men's clubs of the north of England as you could imagine. Arthur Baker, with his lion's mane of long, dark, curly hair and a somewhat satanic goatee, presided over this scene like a godfather from the underworld.
I think we were all a bit frightened of him because we never saw pictures of him. I mean, obviously we've heard his music. So we went to New York on his, territory, and I remember it being really snowy. There's like 6-foot snowstorms.
Arthur was very influenced by New York street music, which was becoming very hip. And yeah, he just spread a little our way, I suppose you'd say. And it was a wonderful experience. Well, the recording wasn't wonderful. It was very difficult, very fraught, and very nerve-wracking.
When New Order arrived to record with Arthur Baker in New York, they did so empty-handed.
Shouldn't we come up with an idea? Something? Nah, you don't want to do that, no. Oh, don't. Nah, he's got it, he's a producer. Be fine. He'll have loads of ideas, Arthur Baker.
So we started working with Arthur, and the way we used to work up until that point was we would go to a rehearsal room and sit around and just talk about what was on television the night before and about this and about that, and have you seen this film or whatever, just chatting until we got bored and then ran out of things to say. And then when that happened, we'd go, well, we better try and write something now. And then we'd write something and just wait for it to fall out of the air. And we'd write, a load of rubbish. And then all of a sudden, something good would happen. And when we worked with Arthur, he didn't work like that. He had various session musicians that come in, and these guys could play 1,000 notes a minute and use both hands at the same time. Well, we were at the using 2 fingers at the same time level.
Arthur installed the band in a Brooklyn studio and told them to come up with the goods, while he finished off another session.
So what we did was we just jammed for hours, literally hours, until the tapes were piling up, thinking we were doing a great job and Arthur was going to have such fun picking the great bits. When Arthur did turn up after about 3 days, he literally had about 8-10 hours of tape to listen to. And it was physically impossible now I think about it. But we showed it him like probably a baby does a poo on the floor going, look what we've done. How clever are we?
I didn't even listen to him. I was just like, let's create together.
Arthur moved the session to a Manhattan studio. Clearly, it was time to get hands-on.
So literally when we walked in the studio in Manhattan, as James Brown was coming out, we went in with nothing. what Arthur started doing to get the impetus going was programming a drum machine, which pissed Steve off no end, which Barney and I thought was quite funny at the time. But obviously, the karma means when it comes around to you, it's not funny. So he programmed the drum machine, and basically we just started jamming in the studio with the keyboards and the guitars and the basses that were set up.
So I remember going in the studio and just like really sweating it out and really trying to get ideas together. And we came out with Confusion.
So what exactly did Arthur Baker bring into New Order's world in 1983?
Bigger lines of cocaine, I think.
All right, apart from that, what did Arthur Baker bring into the mix?
The other thing was, that was a fun track. So they really weren't known for making fun tracks. So the rat-ta-ta-ta, all the little hooks in there, it was fun. And we all got in the studio, and Rob was in the studio, and we were all doing the vocals together.
And doing backing vocals and stuff like that, and having all the lads in the studio chanting and stuff. So it's quite exciting because we never do anything like that. But he sort of bullied you, made you do it, and then when you listen to the record, it was something that you wouldn't have thought of.
Confusion captures New Order at a moment of intrepid exploration. Watch the music video for the track, and you'll see a band prowling the nightclubs of Manhattan, taking it all in. Tom Atencio.
They're walking through a pretty experimental club with Arthur Baker at 2 a.m. They're out there, they're in it, and willing to let themselves be photographed and documented doing it. So they have a great deal of curiosity about the culture around them, and they were deeply interested in house music and remixes and culture that was coming from the streets.
The aptly named Confusion might have felt chaotic from the inside, but for those who were paying attention to New Order, it was a perfect next step. American DJ Veronica Vasica.
I think it just pronounced what they were already doing and made it all the more danceable. It brought this New York City street edge to what they were doing.
Manchester's very own DJ Paulette was thrilled to see her hometown heroes embrace the New York sound.
When they started working with Arthur, we weren't really doing that in the UK musically. That New York disco, electronic energy.
Most important of all, Confusion felt like a more than satisfactory answer to an impossible question. How do you follow Blue Monday? Johnny Marr.
But as a frontman in New Order, Bernard, you could argue that in 1983-84 was probably the coolest guy who walked the earth, really. Don't tell him I said that. All eyes were always on them. What's their next release going to be? What's their next release going to be? Because they were, after Blue Monday particularly, they were known for innovation. And he pushed the envelope. He took the kind of Salford working class disco kid off the beach and out of the gay club and onto the stage in the middle of indie land with a real confidence, and he pulled it off, and it's not something that you can ape.
New Order were never that bothered about writing another hit. Take the other single to emerge from that session with Arthur Baker.
Arthur came in the morning when we were recording Confusion and said that he'd seen a saying sprayed on the wall in Brooklyn as he was making his way to Manhattan, and it was Thieves Like Us.
Yes, it's called love. Oh, it's called love. And it belongs to us.
The plan had always been to record 2 tracks with Arthur in New York.
My memory of it was that we hardly got anywhere. And literally, we came back with like 8 bars. or something. And then when we got back, we started again.
When the group got back to the UK, they finished the track off. For Peter Hook, listening back to it now, it tells the story of a band still exploring.
We were very open to anything, really, which is what makes Thieves Like Us such a wonderful song. Primarily, it has that really super intro, and instrumental bits in it are just as important as the vocal parts. And yeah, I mean, the wonderful thing, as Pete Saville is very want to say, is that when you don't know what you're doing, you make some wonderful mistakes. And then as soon as you learn how to do it, those moments are gone.
Arthur Baker.
Confusion came out, it did what it did. And then, you know, I wasn't really in touch with them. They were in the UK. But the thing was, one night I'm outside the tunnel and I'm waiting in line. I hear this beat and I'm like, damn, that's definitely my beat. Someone has totally stolen my beat. And the club had like a ladder and the DJ booth was up top. But I climb upstairs and I look and it's Thieves Like Us, New Order.
And so the song, born in New York, had organically found its way back from whence it came. The new direction they were taking, it made sense in America. Suddenly, everything about New Order made sense there. The very same year as New Order's fateful session with Arthur Baker, Kevin Cummins would shoot the band on their US tour. For the first time, he found himself wanting to take a new kind of picture of his favourite subjects.
I was desperately trying to get away from the idea that we were living in this post-war gloomy city. And I didn't feel if we were going to do a thing about New Order going to America and the kind of optimism of doing something like that, especially after the dark year or so after Ian's death, it should be more optimistic photographically.
Suddenly, all those moody, monochrome shots of post-industrial ruin didn't make sense for this band. They'd moved beyond that.
I decided I wanted to shoot the whole thing in colour, to take it away from the style of Joy Division. So we did the photos by the pool in the Holiday Inn in DC.
The resulting portraits of a young, good-looking group lounging around a sunny pool have a certain David Hockney quality to them. They made visual something that fans of New Order had already started to hear in the music. This was a new New Order. Andrew O'Hagan.
There was a sense that they were trying to find a voice out of the gloom, really, of not only having lost Ian Curtis, but of Ian Curtis's mentality. They were looking for a kind of survival sound almost, it seemed to me, and they found it themselves. They invented it. They sound like a wholly original band. I mean, there's threads going back to where they'd been, who they'd been, the post-industrial sound, but there's an optimism suddenly, and there's a sort of depth of field in those songs that feels entirely to have their signature, the signature of New Order, not of the band that quickly formed themselves out of the ruins of Joy Division. They were suddenly a band that had a fresh sound.
Thought that never changes remains a stupid lie. It's never been quite the same. No hearing or breathing, no movement, no colour, just silence.
Which, I suppose, goes to explain why the American labels were sniffing around. So when Tom Atencio, the slick American record man, shows up to that Miners Benefit gig in '84, he might see pandemonium, but he also clearly sees something he likes, a band with global potential. And far from being put off by Tom Atencio's temper tantrum, Rob seemed to like it.
I think ultimately that Rob kind of appreciated I wasn't a typical label executive. I had a production deal with Quincy. I was working for myself. And so it was quite important to me, every level. It was quite personal. And I think Rob appreciated that.
In the end, the band signed their deal with Quest and Tom Atencio, heading boldly into a new chapter of their operation. I wish I could tell you it was the only time disagreements between Rob Gretton and Tom Atencio ended up in a fistfight. Just one evening in the company of this unruly lot had driven this slick American frenzied with frustration. Imagine what the better part of a decade would do.
I was so angry, I just sprung across the room at Rob's throat.
The transatlantic tug of war has only just begun. New Order will soon find themselves dancing with the devil. Major labels, arena tours, the notion that a record should turn a profit, heaven forbid. But in the meantime, there's the distracting business of another album to make. Emphasis on distracting.
I remember on Lowlife, it was pretty intense, and the amount of fun we were having in the studio had got very excessive by that stage.
We sort of got into this thing where we'd go out clubbing again after we'd finished, because the clubs were open until 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning.
As soon as we saw all these old blokes getting their asses slapped by these dominatrixes, we just thought it was dead funny, you know, but it was a great place to go for a drink.
Join us in episode 2 as we step inside the subterranean world of Lowlife. Transmissions, the definitive story of Joy Division and New Order, is a Cup and Nuzzle production. It's presented by me, Elizabeth Alker. Our series producer is Frank Palmer. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts.